Yeah. Ariel, can you hear me?
Hello.
Hi. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, everybody. Yep. Yeah,
You never know.
how are you enjoying the series on our Shimon's Cup?
Very much.
Interesting, huh?
Very much. How'd you know that I was
I,
participating
I
in it?
saw you there tonight. But
Oh,
you're a sponsor also, no?
am I still a sponsor? Yeah, I did sponsor. Yeah,
Yeah.
very good. I'm glad to know that I'm still a sponsor. Yes, I am a big fussed of Mark Shapiro.
Yeah.
We traveled with him. I listened to as many of his sherms as I possibly can. Yeah, he's uh, he's really quite special.
hmm his son used to be a teacher in the Associated Hebrew Schools in Toronto.
Really,
Yeah. He used to
his
daven in the
son.
same shul. His son. My
Fascinating.
father's a Talmud of Shimon, and then he went to the Mir. But so I remember him
Oh, right,
speaking.
right, right. Well, I heard that tonight. Avraham. I mean, yes, that was
Oh, yeah,
great.
the
That's
professor.
yeah,
He
yeah.
was the one that
Looking for
was the
the job. He
professor.
had an MA. He was studying for
Right,
a
right, right,
PhD.
right.
He was in Toronto.
But
Yeah,
he
yeah,
was a Malamed.
yeah. I think that's what Sharon said at the end. I don't know if you stayed to the end. She said she had him as a teacher. He was a big honor, and you never knew.
Never
And
know. They used
yeah,
to call him Marshkop.
Marshall, interesting.
Marshkop.
He also apparently, according to Mark, didn't finish his PhD, but that's true of a lot of people.
Right.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I always find his shirim very interesting.
Who's Marx?
Yeah, Mark's
Yeah.
very much so. I've read all his books. He said I'm a real chassid.
Yeah. Where shall we begin?
Hello.
Prior to the rain, where they knew there'd be trouble, in the burn area.
Okay, we're in the sugi of creams, makeup, all of that. Right? And I think we finished to 102,
No, we didn't.
No, no.
Brushing teeth.
the brushing teeth, right? So that's 102.
Yeah, that's where we should start today. That's where we started. Yeah.
Correct. We did up until 102.
Yes.
Brushing teeth. In the final section, we will discuss one more issue relating to body care, brushing teeth. Although brushing is certainly important for proper dental care of one's teeth, it involves a number of potential problems on Shabbat, including sechita, squeezing, which is a tolda of dash, threshing, and mareach, spreading, which is a tolda of mamachik. When brushing one's teeth, water and toothpaste stuck between the fine bristles of the toothbrush is forced out. Does this violate the prohibition against schita on Shabbat? The Gemara in Masechet Shabbos discusses the case of a woman in childbirth who needs oil to be brought to her via the Rishus HaRabim. A Baraisa says that if it's possible for a friend to bring it in her hair, she could do so rather than a vessel. Meaning, it sounds like she's going to put oil in her hair and come over to the friend's house and squeeze it out, right? The Amoraim dispute whether squeezing the oil out of her hair violates the malach of schita. That if the need was for the oil, so typically mishum schita, it should be forbidden because of the malach of schita squeeze. Rabbi Rav Yosef Damar Tavar ein schita b'seyar. Hair, there's no squeezing by hair.
I got it.
Rav Ashi Omar afilu tema yesh schita b'seyar. Even according to those that hold that there is schita, mevia la b'kli derech sa'ara. Here, she's not putting the oil in her hair. She's putting like a kli in her hair, which is filled with shemen. The kama de efshar l'shanui meshanina. Rather than carrying it in a normal way, she carries it in her hair. The Rambam rules in accordance with Rabbi Rav Yosef, though, that the malach of schita does not apply to squeezing liquid out of one's hair. There's no, right? The Rambam says, ein schita b'seir. However, the Magid Mishnah writes that although one is not liable to bring echatzes for squeezing liquid, it is rabbinically prohibited. Rav Ovadia Yosef understands that the Rashba and the Ritva disagree and hold that squeezing liquid from hair is entirely permitted, but that Rav Ovadia writes that the halacha follows the stringent view. Right? Says the Magid Mishnah, ein schita b'seir miu isur ikka. There's no chatchatas violation, but there's a rabbinic prohibition. And the Mishnah Berurah rules like the stringent opinion and warns that one who uses the mikvah on Shabbos must be careful to avoid squeezing water out of his hair or her hair. Hasoichet shear or if you squeeze hair or leather, hide, potter avaloser. When you towel your hair after getting out of the mikvah, for the Hasidim who go to the mikvah on Shabbos, you have to be careful not to squeeze the water out of your hair. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Hasochet se'ar or potter of a loser. The reason that schita does not apply to hair on a derisidical level is because hair really doesn't absorb liquid. The appearance of schita is created due to the fact that liquids get trapped between the hairs. This is rabbinically prohibited, according to the Maggid Mishnah. The same would seem to apply to brushing teeth. As water and toothpaste get trapped between the bristles of the toothbrush, but do not get absorbed into the individual's bristles. So it might be a rabbinic prohibition. However, Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, otherwise known as the Sridei Eish, the great posek who lived in Switzerland after the war, he became the Rosh Yeshiva of the Berlin Seminary. There was a rabbinical seminary in Berlin. And he has many famous truvas. The Nazis tried to aser shchita, and Rav Yachal, he wrote a famous truva about stunning. They prohibited doing that, and there was also, he has a famous truva on that. The Sridei Eish's famous truva is on reference Bnei Akiva, that he knew that there were like co-ed events, like they would do Shalashudis in the sniff, and the boys and girls would get together. He wrote a relatively lenient psak. He also wrote a very famous psak on Bas Mitzvah, one of the first Orthodox poskim that gave value, that said that psychologically when a boy goes through bar mitzvah, it's a growth thing, and women need it as well. So he's a very important gadol. Rabbi Mark Shapiro, many of us have gone on trips with him. He wrote his PhD thesis on Sridei Eish, and it was his first book, and that's how he got known. I met Mark Shapiro way before going on trips with him. It must have been over 30 years ago, right after the book on the Sridei Eish was published. He was a scholar in residence in New Rochelle, where my sister lives. And I was there for Shabbos. That's when I met him. And the whole weekend was on the Sridei Eish. He opens the book that when he passed away, it was like 1965, 1966, something like that. And he was buried in Israel. There was a fight because the Mizrahi saw him as a posek that they relied on. So they had the Aron, but then the Haredi community literally wrenched the Aron away, and he was buried by where the Rosh Yeshivas were. That because he was a posek that was accepted in both worlds. This is Rav Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg. So he says, not uncommonly, brushing teeth does not violate schita and is permitted on Shabbos for a combination of 4 reasons. One does not intend to squeeze liquid out of the toothbrush, right? There's no kavanah although this will happen inevitably, right? It's a psik reisha. According to many poskim, psik reisha is permitted when it's only a rabbinic prohibition. Number 2, the liquid squeezed out goes to waste. Schita is only prohibited if one uses the liquid, or if one wants to clean the object if one is squeezing. According to Ravid, squeezing out an object with a handle is permitted. Number 4, it's impossible for people to manage without cleaning their teeth. And we find elsewhere that schita is permitted under such circumstances. Let's see the Sridei Eish himself. Kvodo sha'al imutar l'nakot et hashinai b'mavreshet b'Shabbos. Somebody asked him, can you brush your teeth on Shabbos? He says, in my humble opinion, I would rule leniently. He says, to be concerned about schita, that's not a reason to prohibit. Sharei eino mechavin klal lischot. His kavan is not to squeeze. Ve'ein lomar david psik reisha. You're going to tell me, we know that davar shenim miskavein, Reb Shimon holds his potter, and we paskin like Reb Shimon. But Reb Shimon is moed with psik reisha. Psik reisha means we know for sure it's going to happen, so we don't care what your intent is. He gives us an important yesod. That's why it's important to read all these truvas. You could be lenient by psik reisha if it's a rabbinic prohibition. We've already proved that squeezing hair, if it is a malacha, it's only rabbinic. That's number one, he says. V'su. And also, de bahalo shaykh schita. Let's say you have a fruit, and you squeeze the fruit, and the juice is going to be discarded. It's not schita. We learned it. Now, it's going to squeeze a garment. There, even if the liquid goes for loss, it's still usher. Matam, mishum deschitas perusu mishum mafarik. Mafarik is a tolda of dash. And that's squeezing fruit is a problem, is a tolda of that. Mafarik is like separating the good from the bad, a little bit like boirer, but you're squeezing, threshing wheat, and a good part is coming out. So if it's li'ibud, if it's going to be lost, then there's no mafarik. Now, when you squeeze a wet garment, you want the garment to be improved. You're like laundering the garment. Hinebe mishmeret, it's a strainer. Mutter l'sanin yainu mayim, you're allowed to strain wine or water. Mishum she'ena choshesh l'schita. You're not going to wash the strainer, squeeze it out. You're not cleaning it. He says, where? In our case, the toothbrush is made like that. We're not in the business of whitening the toothbrush by getting it wet. That's the whole purpose of it, says the Sridei Eish. He says, V'yesh l'tzaref od laheter. A tziruf is like an additional point for a heter. Mashizker kvod b'sfog sheyesh lo beis achiza. Like a sponge that has a handle. Shemuter l'kanech bo. So a sponge with a handle, you can clean with it. Now Rambam mefarsh b'shum shebelo beis achiza yevshar shelo yischot. He says without a handle,
You're squeezing.
Without a handle, you're always going to end up like think about a handheld sponge. There's no way to deal with it. You're always going to squeeze it. If it has a handle on it, you have a way of not necessarily squeezing it. Ayin Rambam. However, our Ravid Bemis discussion is that the Ravid wasn't happy with the Rambam, Kemosh Kosov Kvot Torah, so that you still have an issue of schita because of atam debieshlo beis achiza avi kitzluchis. But the Ravid said that if the sponge has a handle, it's like you have a container of water, mlea mayim, shemevik b'menu mayim, ayin sham. So it's like taking water out of a kli. V'otam latir, another reason to be matal pia gemara. You were allowed to go into the hot springs of Tveria, and you could towel yourself off. Adam balloons. It's because it was a standard to dry yourself off. V'mata oiser listabeg ata oiser b'chitza. If you prohibit the toweling, you prohibited the washing. V'yefshar lamad b'lo b'chitza. Chazal understood that people couldn't go without that washing. Ein or chayim. V'nidan didani efshar l'rov b'nei adam lamad b'lo nikion shinayim. Says the majority of people cannot go without brushing their teeth. And they give a little biography, right? He was he lungered under the altar of Slobodka, also Nemir. He got a university degree, got a doctorate in a German university. As you understand, the rabbi, if you were going to be appointed a rabbi in Germany, you needed to have a PhD. So he taught at the Hildesheimer Rabbinical Seminary. Rav Ezra Hildesheimer had established the seminary like in 1880 or so, and he became the Rosh Yeshiva there. So he really embraced Torah Derech Eretz.
There's a very poignant, moving article by Rabbi Weinberg Zatzal on the last class in the Hildesheimer Seminary, what it was like, what they knew the Germans were coming. It's quite a piece of work. I'm sure it's available on the internet.
Thank you. It notes here that Rabbi Weinberg maintained relationships with Gentiles and with Reformed Jews. It was a little bit of controversy when Professor Shapiro published that. Some felt it was Lashon Hara. He should have kept it quiet. And Mark responded. It was major. And Rabbi J.J. Schechter got involved. I don't know if you remember. There was back and forth in tradition, in multiple other Torah journals. It was a real cause de célèbre at the time. And,
he writes that Samuel Atlas, who it's mentioned here, was his closest friend, and he was a professor at HUC. He also wrote a lot about how we don't treat Goyim with respect, and he quotes a lot of places where the Gemara seems to be giving very short shrift to Goyim. That bothered him a lot. So that was also another part of the controversy.
Okay, so it's good. It's nice that we see this 3-day Aish. It doesn't surprise me that he's in a Mizrahi publication. It was very important to the Mizrahi world. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach's comments are printed at the end of this tshuva. Although he agrees in principle to the leniency based on the last two reasons provided by Rav Weinberg, he rejects the first two reasons. Furthermore, he adds that many have adopted the stringent practice of avoiding brushing one's teeth on Shabbos. Keinim em divrei hadras gaono sheyesh kama ponim lahatir. He says the words of the Gaon is correct, to be lenient. Lanias daiti u'me'advarim ha'mutarim shenagu bo isser. He says this is an example of a halacha that on its face is mutter, but the practice has been to prohibit. V'rabim ma'yireim roim b'zeh isser chamor. He says the righteous or God-fearing people prohibit brushing their teeth. V'anochi lo yadati tam nachal le'isser. Rosh Shlomo Zalman also says, I don't really understand the prohibition. Ach masha kosav kvot toroso sharei eno mechavin lischot, that which he wanted to say. There's no kavana. Lo avinoti. Harei tovel es amavreshes b'mayim leman tizbog l'tzochomayim. He says we dip our toothbrush under the water on purpose to absorb water in it. And then you want it to come out because you're going to brush your teeth with the water. And that which he said, V'chein mashakosam b'sikreisha d'shobit Rabbanan, kvar kosafti lamala, lo yadati matam ena maskir samagin avron shebesiven shein yudalid, who's machmir by b'sikreisha by Rabbanan. So he's wondering why this 3-day Aish didn't mention the Magen Avram. So he rejects the first two reasons to be matir. The fact that what is being squeezed out goes for loss, that I also don't understand. Even though everything, the toothpaste, the water, it's going to go away with sofa mazli vadili ibud. It means they're active while he's brushing his teeth. The water and the toothpaste are there. Yeah, they're going to go liibud, but they're not liibud now, says Rav Shlomo Zalman. He doesn't want the toothpaste and the water to go down the drain. He wants it to clean his teeth. But Rav Shlomo Zalman agrees with the other reasons he gave. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Rav Moshe Feinstein writes that it's preferable to avoid using water when brushing one's teeth on Shabbos. See the Igros Moshe. The poskim raise another potential issue for someone who wants to use toothpaste to brush his teeth on Shabbos. Rav Moshe Feinstein writes that this is strictly prohibited, as spreading the toothpaste on the teeth violates the prohibition against mamachek, smoothing. Im toothpaste, however, Rav Yoshe Bar Soloveitchik and Rav Rosh Hashanah ruled that one may brush one's teeth using toothpaste on Shabbos, as mamachek only applies when the smooth substance remains on the surface it's spread on. Although some toothpaste advertisements claim that a layer does remain, Rav Soloveitchik did not believe that this was true, and added that even if it was true, such a thin layer does not have halachic significance. This comes from the Nefesh HaRav, right, which was the great work of Rav Hershel Schechter, bringing down a lot of psakim and a lot of stories about Rav Soloveitchik. Rabbeinu Yasover Shemuter Lishtamish b'mishchas shinayim b'Shabbos. He says Rav Soloveitchik permitted toothpaste. De'ein b'zeh mishum mareach. He said it does not involve this smoothing halacha. El b'makom shoysiv shetach chelik chadash al gabi mashu. But there's no mamarech unless something is left behind. First of all, the toothpaste isn't placed like a polish. Think about polishing something. It's not the way toothpaste is used. After you brush it a few times, it's already spread on the teeth. It's equal among all the teeth. It doesn't remain. Maybe it remains on the surface a few minutes and then it goes away. So we certainly have poskim who permit it. Rav Ovadia Yosef rules similarly, permits using toothpaste on Shabbos. In the Abiyah Omer, look at footnote 50. Regarding schita, in addition to the reasons provided by Rav Weinberg, he has the fact that some Rishonim hold that schita does not apply to hair even on a rabbinic level. So remember, the whole problem was psik reisha, and you have the Magen Avraham who says that by a lav min rabbanon you have to consider psik reisha, but Rav Yosef brought Rishonim that hold that there's no rabbinic prohibition at all. In the continuation of the tshuva of the Srei Eish, Rav Weinberg prohibits using toothpaste for a different reason, as the toothpaste dissolves in this violation of the rabbinic prohibition against molid. He learns this from the ruling of the Ramah, prohibited washing with hard soap. Rav Ovadia Yosef observes that Sfardim generally do not follow this ruling of the Ramah regarding soap, and thus this moilid concern does not apply regarding toothpaste, but implies that those who refrain from using soap should also not use toothpaste. However, even most Ashkenazic poskim don't mention this concern, as they understand that moly does not apply to substances like toothpaste that are only quasi-solid to start with. Right? I mean, soap is solid. We don't use soap. That's an Ashkenazi minig. We use liquid soap, but not soft soap, not hard soap that you rub. Rav Aryeh Leibowitz writes that even if one follows the stringent approach, one can avoid many of the issues by brushing in a specific manner. Both the problem of memareach and molid can easily be avoided by using liquid toothpaste. Any potential schita problem may easily be avoided by simply not wetting the toothbrush before using it and not rubbing the brush as water runs over it after use. This is an article that appeared in the Journal of Halacha and Contemporary Society. He mentions other problems with brushing teeth causing bleeding. There's uvda dechol and hachana, meaning you're making, if you wash the toothbrush after using it, you're making it for a use sometime other than now. He says flossing would be permitted, assuming one's teeth do not bleed. But you can't cut the floss on Shabbos because you ripped. Rav Moshe Zweig raises another potential problem with brushing teeth, namely that it may violate the prohibition of using medicine. Until recently, most assumed that brushing teeth constitutes a preventive act to avoid cavities, but Rav Dr. Ephraim Rudolph has recently raised the possibility that new medical information has shown that brushing teeth contains some therapeutic value to the tooth as well. He nevertheless writes that Rav Shechter and Rav Asher Weiss wrote to him that this does not violate the halachic prohibition of medicine on Shabbos, either because it's not visible to the naked eye, Rav Weiss, or because not brushing teeth could ultimately lead to sakonas aver, as one may lose proper functioning of one's teeth, Rav Shechter. Machshava. In his Sefer Kol Ram, Rav Moshe Feinstein explains that the purpose of ceasing malacha on Shabbos is not only to enjoy physical rest and relaxation from labor from the other days of the week, rather we refrain from malacha in order to free ourselves from our regular responsibilities and allow for time to serve Hashem. B'Shabbat sheyesh gam tam gashmi, the Gentiles and the heretics, they think Shabbos is for physical rest. That you're resting, so you have strength to work another 6 days. B'yom Rishon machmas shadar b'na akum. If the whole point of Shabbos, Rav Moshe says, is for just physical benefit, it's better to do it on Sunday, because the Goyim also have Sunday. It's also problematic for Jews to observe Shabbat. And you'll come to do work on Shabbos because you want to, if you think that the whole point of physical rest, you want to move it to Sunday. So that's why you need a Rav. To explain the truth, Shabbos Yisodei Emunah. The reason we rest on Shabbos is because of Bitochen and Hashem. The Eidus L'Chidush Ha'olam. And testimony that God created the world. It's because it's a holy day that we're prohibited from work. Rav Moshe's insight demonstrate that while the positive mitzvahs of Shabbos, such as having 3 meals, are part of the priority of enjoying Shabbos, our withdrawal from performing halacha is part of a movement to rise above the physical world on Shabbos. The attitude of prioritizing the spirit, the holy, is also reflected in the way that the halacha removes us from heavy involvement in maintaining outward appearances on Shabbos, like not brushing our hair, not brushing our teeth. Although appearance is certainly important, we cannot let our personal grooming get in the way of prioritizing the spiritual focus of Shabbos. Rather, we must focus our efforts on spiritual growth and striving for closeness with Hashem. Okay, page 121. Animals performing malacha. Care for animals, interaction with them, both domesticated animals and wild animals, relates to a number of halakhic issues on Shabbos. Some of the more relevant challenges related to animals on Shabbos include the prohibitions of using animals for performing labor, trapping or confining animals, killing insects and pests, moving animals and their associated items according to the laws of Muktzah, and feeding animals. And in the next two shiurim, we will explore these issues in detail. We begin by discussing the Torah prohibition of working animals on Shabbos, followed by the prohibition of trapping. We will then address killing animals, moving animals, and feeding animals. The Torah explicitly prohibits allowing one's animal to perform malacha when presenting the mitzvah to observe Shabbos. Yom HaShvi Shabbos Lashem Elokecha. This is Aseret Adibros. Lo sasa kol malacha. Don't do work. Ata uvin chovitecha. Avducha v'mascha uvemtecha. Your animal. V'gercha asher b'sharecha. When the Ten Commandments are repeated in Dvarim, in Vaschanan, the Torah specifies that one's ox, donkey, and all one's animal may not perform labor on Shabbos. Yom HaShvi Shabbat L'Shem Elokecha. Lo sasa kumlocha tavin chavitecha v'avdecha v'mascha v'shorcha v'chamarcha v'chol b'amtecha. So it says shorcha, chamorcha, and behemtecha. The Mishnah Masechta Bava Kama clarifies that this prohibition applies to any domesticated animal, wild beast, or bird. Echad shor echad kol behema. It says a wild animal or an undomesticated animal, and birds as well. So, despite what the seeming biblical status of this prohibition, the Amoraim and the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos debate whether there's any liability for someone whose animal performs labor on Shabbos. Omer Rabbi Bar Chama, Hamachamer achar behemto b'Shabbos. That means you've laden up your donkey with packages, and then you move him. That's the law of machamer, with a stick, or you lead him, right? B'shogeg chayv chatas. If you do it unwittingly, i.e., you didn't know today was Shabbos, or you didn't know that malacha existed, then you bring a chatas. B'meizid chayv skil. My time. Amarava. Damakar lo isaza kamlocha tavem tchabehem behem to do mididei. Your animal's like you. Mahu b'shogeg chayv chatas b'meizid chayv skila af behemto nami. So if you caused your animal to work, you're going to be b'shogeg chayv chatas b'meizid chayv skila. That means if a malacha was performed by his animal, Amar Rav shtei tshuvas v'davar chada, dichsiv Torah achas yelachem la'oseh bishkaga. Torah achat yelachem la'oseh bishkaga. This is a pasuk in Bamidbar. There's one halacha to doing it b'shogeg. That nefesh asher taseh biyad ramah, a person who does it b'mezid, Huksha kol haTorah kula avodah zarah. So this is written by avodah zarah. These psukim, and therefore all other lavim in this regard are compared. Ma avodah zarah, David Maisa Begufei. To violate avodah zarah, you have to do something with your body. You have to bow down. You have to shecht an animal. You have to do a physical act with your body. Hachanami, ada avid maisa begufe. So too, we learn from avodah zarah that in order to violate this, you've got to do something with your body. So, Amar Rav Yochanan, so therefore, if your animal's doing work, you're going to be potter. You're not even chayiv v'chatas. The husha kol Torah kol avodah zarah. You didn't do anything with your body. You get skila if when you mechalal it b'shogeg you bring a chatas. Ha'ein chayav shegegos chatas. But if you're not gonna be obliged to bring a chatas, ein chayav nos donos skila. So Rav Yochanan has proved that you're not going to bring a chatas, you're not going to get kares if your animal does labor on Shabbos, because you physically haven't done anything with your body. Belav nami lo machai. So a regular lav where you get malchus, Rabbi Yochanan seems to say you're not chayv that either. Tavale lav shenitin lazors misas bezdin. This is a lav where technically the Eidim, when they warn, which potentially could have the death penalty. There's a principle of if you have two punishments, one is worse than the other, you get treated with the worst punishment. So, and then there's this other principle. So since Misa is potentially attached to this lav, if you do it in the right parameters, there's no malchus either, because of this principle of lav of kolav the kolav shenit lazar's misas beis and loikin lav. And even according to the opinion, it says you do get malchus. Lichtav rachmana lo sasa kom lachavem techa. What's the ata uvehem techa? Let it just say, don't lo taseh kom lacha uvem techa. Why stick the ata in there? Ata lamali. Hu ninu mechayim behem to lo mechayim. That he, if he performs a malacha on Shabbos, is going to get punished. But a malacha that's performed by his animal, he's not chayiv for. And the Rambam rules in accordance with Rabbi Yochanan, says that violators of this prohibition are not liable or subject to human punishment. Asur lahotzi masal behema b'Shabbos. You can't have your animal carry out a burden for you out, right? You have to let your animals rest. You did it. There is a positive commandment to cause your animal to rest. Fine, you violated that. But ain't a loke. You don't get malchus. It's like a lavanitic laseh of shvisa, of resting. Even if it's a burden on it, you're potter from punishment. Now, the Rambam asks a very valid point. I mean, what's going on here? Aser Sadibro says, Lo tasa kom locha tauvin chovitech v'chavoscha v'evem techa. So if there's no punishment, there's no lav, why mention it? Shelo yachrish ba, to teach you can't plow with it. The chayotze b'chrisha, and other malachas that you need to do with an animal. The nimtza lav shenitin lazros misas bezin vein lokin lo, but it still ends up connected to something that is potentially punishable by death when he does it by himself, and therefore there's no malchus. So the Rambam explains that not only is there a negative commandment forbidding a person from using one's animal to perform labor on Shabbos, but there's a positive commandment of shvisa, to allow one's animal to rest on Shabbos. In the Midrash of the Mechilta, the Chazal deduce that the prohibition applies only to animals being used for burdensome malachas. However, a person should not prevent an animal from the kind of labor which the animal might perform completely for its own purposes, such as eating items that are attached to the ground, even though the same activity would constitute the malacha of kotzer for a person. If an animal eats grass, well, he's like the lawnmower for the person. That means if a human did it, he'd be chayiv. So even though the animal is doing something that if he did it, he'd be chayiv for, the animal has its own reasons for doing it. Right? L'manya no shorcha v'chamarecha. Hoysif lo akosuv nayich echad. The Torah added this thing of resting your animal, yos tolish min hakarka v'oichel, to allow the animal to graze and eat. Maybe you have to lock him up in your house and not him do anything. That's not resting your animal, it's causing the animal to be tsar, because he wants to eat. As reported in the Gemara above, the Amiroim debate if someone driving one's animal, Mechamer, on Shabbos, is liable for having violated a negative commandment and formally performing labor by using the animal. Elsewhere, the Gemara describes animal labor in another way, stating that a person is commanded to rest one's animal on Shabbos. Says Masech Levad Zara, Adam Mitzuv al Shvisas Be'emto b'Shabbos. You're commanded to cause your animal to rest on Shabbos. What is the nature of that obligation to rest an animal? Is this obligation distinct from the negative commandment described above? As we saw above, the Rambam indicates that both positive and negative commandments apply to using an animal in the course of performing labor. It's also noteworthy that when writing his ruling, the Rambam twice mentions performing labor with an animal and not one's animal. This implies that it's prohibited to use even an animal which is not one's own. However, if one's animal performs malacha of its own accord on Shabbos, there appears to be no obligation to prevent it from doing so, according to that view. The Or Zarua assumes that driving the animal constitutes a violation of the negative commandment to prevent the animal from performing labor. However, he assumes that this prohibition only applies to one's own animal, and he reasons that one cannot be liable even for driving an animal which he has rented from a Gentile. Rabbeinu Ephraim Kosav, Rabbeinu Ephraim was a Rishon. Im Sachar Behema, he rented an animal from a non-Jew. The Chimerach ran, and he drove it on Shabbos to carry burdens. Chayiv Chatas. The Schirus V'She'ela. He borrowed, he rented, Aval Ktsas Kanya. There's a little bit of a kinyan. So therefore, in some ways, it's partially his. However, that's what Rabbeinu Ephraim wrote. But the Or Zarua says, "Enoni Rabbeinu." He doesn't accept that. He says it came out of a Adam Gadol. We should be careful not to work even an animal that doesn't, from a non-Jew. However, the Ran rather Rishonim write that the parameters of these halachas are distinct from each other. The positive command of resting one's animal applies only to one's own animal. But if someone drives an animal, even another's animal, this constitutes a violation of the negative commandment to use an animal in performing labor. Shvisas be'emto ein kan safek she'ein be'emazu shelo. if you've sold your animal to a non-Jew, so there's no longer any lav of shvisas, of causing your animal to rest. But there's still, you can't use him to carry a burden. Kivan deshama lakale, he knows your voice. He's going to move in response to your voice. It's not going to be any different to his, whether it's his animal or not. He's doing the Isra himself. Many Achorim assume that the halacha follows the view of the Ran, that one would be liable for mechamer, anyone's animal. But the positive commandment to rest one's animal is only to your own animal. And this is stated by the Mishnah Berurah. Afilu meina bema shelo, even if it's not his. Tzorach lizar b'kach, you have to be careful. These are mechamer shaykh afilu b'memes acherim. You can't work even another person's animal. Certainly if it's his. The katarti, you have mechamer, and then you have shvizas bento, so you have two different malachas when it comes to an animal. So, based on the sources we have seen, one practical application of these halachot would be that one who owns an animal must not allow it to carry an item defined as a burden where there is no eruv. See Shulchan Aruch, which discusses a situation in which someone is stranded outside the city at the onset of Shabbos. In such a case, a person may place his muktzah items upon his animal, but only after the animal has begun to walk. This is because the Torah prohibition of carrying is not violated in such a case, and the animal actions therefore do not qualify as mechamer, as driving it. So the Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa says, Midine shvisas behemto, from the laws that you have to cause your animal to rest, hu shebaleh chayiv lidok lekach, the owner is required to make sure shelo teitzi lalo shusarabim, v'lo lekarmelit, b'shah shemasa aleh. The animal should not go out into shusarabim or a carmelis when it has something on it. Gam imasa kvar haya lemi bod yom, even if it was on the animal from before Shabbos. Uvechla masa, what's considered a burden? Kol davar sheinu bal shmira sar gila shel gufa behema. Anything that is on the animal that's not part of protecting the animal. Aval kol shabal shmira sar gila shel gufa behema. Anything that the animal is wearing for its protection, hareyu la kemalvush la adam. It's the same like clothing for a person. Umutter laniach lalatzes bo. And he can wear that. Ushmira regila, perusha shmira letovasa behema, means it's good for the animal. You could go and shmir, let's say they put a sweater on the animal because it's cold. Shmir, they call tzaracher. Let's say it's wearing a cast, right? V'chein shmir shelo tivrach v'tobat. Or let's say some kind of thing that prevents it from escaping or being lost. Or ishmir al nikon tzamra, or its wool or its coat to stay clean. Aval im bichlal ze shmir sheshoyim misabema kedei shelo tazik k'gon hazamim, a muzzle shenotnim al pir shelo tinoshach, so it shouldn't bite, or shelo tochel, or shouldn't eat from somewhere else. That's a burden. But you can't allow your dog to go out that way. A leash, in order for its protection, you tie a leash around its neck. You can walk it in its Rishus Harabim with that rope. The end of it shouldn't protrude out of a person's hand. So you have to make sure that the leash doesn't sag So it comes to within a tefach of the ground. When you wrap the leash around the neck, you shouldn't lean on the animal. What about an identification tag? That's not a normal protection. You can't have it go out with a dog tag. To a place that where carrying is prohibited. You can't take your dog to a place that doesn't have an eruv. When they have their dog tag on the dog. The government, I guess, gives them a disc that the taxes have been paid, or it's not a wild dog or a rabid dog. But if some kind of tattoo, I guess, some kind of siman in the dog itself, they had some kind of nail in the ear of the animal with an identification number. That's okay. You can't take it off. It should be noted that it's forbidden to use an animal for certain tasks, even within an area that has an area, in which carrying a burden is permitted. According to the Mishnah, one may not ride an animal, even where there's no problem of carrying. Due to concern that one may violate the malach of kotzer, you may cut off a branch and use it like as a whip to help lead the animal. So it's all gzeira, right? You might cut off a branch. Rashi and many others explain the concerns that the riders have to sever a tree branch, so to use it to strike the animal while riding it. We had it in the Daf Yomi. So in accordance with this statement, the Shulchan Aruch rules that a person may not ride an animal or otherwise lean or rest things upon its body on Shabbos. You cannot hang on it. You can't use the side of the animal. Let's say something is leaning on the side of the animal, you use that thing, so that's permitted. Also, leshiv al kron, you can't sit on a carriage that a Gentile is driving. You're using the animal. And the same gzeira is that you're going to cut a branch to whip it. That's why you can't climb a tree. You may tear off a branch. Okay. Very good, everybody. Any questions, comments, or Aro?
You should teach this to some of the Hasidim in Hancock Park, because when they see somebody walking with a dog on a leash, they get very upset.
We're here. That's only even in Rosh Hashanah you can use.
That's what I'm saying. And the Rosh Hashanah is much more humble, and you can walk with a dog with an animal on a leash.
Right, but you saw it. You can't have the leash more than a tefach out of your hand, and
that's what they're upset about.
And then what was that?
That's what they're upset about. The leash is more than a tefach out of the hand. They don't tell you that, but that's really what they're upset about.
What do you mean? How long is a tefach?
3.6 inches, 3.3, somewhere between 3 and 4.
No, he also doesn't want. We said that the leash,
but that's
not
very
come close to the ground. A tefach.
But that's in Rosh Hashanah.
By the way, in Rambam, I don't know what Yaakov learned. We were taught that animals are muktzah on Shabbos. That's why and because Rav Moshe didn't have a dog. We were always our Rebbeim said the Gedolim don't have pets. Because there's an opinion of muktzah. We're going to learn it later on.
David HaMelech had lots of dogs.
Obviously, it's not an Isser, because we're going to see
that. We learn in the Tanakh that he had the dogs. David HaMelech had dogs.
You know, there's the famous
learn-
story.
Where did we
in the
learn that
Gemara.
he had dogs?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a story there where when he brought, there's definitely that you learn about David HaMelech. It's in the Tanakh, and he had dogs.
Say again?
Well, I mean, a reason that many people don't have dogs is the Gemara,
We talked.
which says that it was a concern about it would threaten and scare someone, like the story in the Gemara where the pregnant woman came and I don't forget who it was, but he tried to get the dog away, and the woman said, "It's too late. I already lost the baby." So there were concerns of safety. I mean, I never heard of a gut owning a dog.
Okay.
I don't know that Shabbos was the issue, that the reason they didn't have dogs.
That depends where you grew up. Where I grew up, there are lots of people. It depends where you grew up. If you grew
Absolutely.
up on Hasidim, then nobody had a dog. They ran away from the dogs.
And a lot of it was too, I mean, in Europe, you know, they could barely
Yeah.
feed themselves. To bring a pet into the house that they had to feed, that was like not a smart thing to do.
Yeah,
It was
but
just
in
an
Europe,
economic motivation.
it was also regarding the Nazis. Also, they didn't want to have dogs after that.
No, because the dogs were in the concentration camps. They brought many of the refugees didn't want dogs. It gave them
Absolutely.
nightmares.
Right,
Mother-in-law
go back,
was,
back.
whenever my late mother-in-law saw a German Shepherd, she reacted very, very negatively. She was in Auschwitz. And when she saw, I remember we went to see Schindler's List, not with her, she would never see it, but my wife was telling her the story. And she said, you know, that in the movie, the dogs were muzzled. He said, of course, in the camps, they were never muzzled. So it was not a good memory for them, to be sure.
That's a very important thing. I think that was one, because in the refugee community growing up in Los Angeles, I don't remember anybody who had pets. And this was something we didn't see.
Not even little birds?
Birds they had. We saw
Birds, yeah.
birds. The birds they had. I'm talking about dogs.
Growing up in South Africa,
There's not common when
Right.
growing up.
growing up in South Africa, and they were all from Lithuanian. They came from the Lita. Most 90% of the Jewish community, and 90% of the Jewish community had a dog or two dogs or whatever.
For safety, for security.
Also true.
What?
You use them for security, right?
No, it's not bad. Yes and no. The dog is a pet.
Right.
You all, everyone. Have a
Alright.
good night.
Okay.
Next week we're
Okay, next
Thank you.
week back to
Tuesday.
normal, back to Tuesday night.
Kodesh Tov u'Mavarach.
Chodesh Tov. Chodesh Tov.
There's